At stadiums all over Brazil, there are people who are very concerned, and it has nothing to do with how the teams are playing on the field. With hundreds of thousands of fans visiting for World Cup, security, as you can imagine, is a major concern. For more on that part of the World Cup story, we're joined by Douglas Smith. He's a former Assistant Secretary of U.S. Department of Homeland Security and currently Executive Vice President of MWW Public Affairs. Douglas, thanks for joining us here.
Thanks for having me.
So last week there was an incident where almost 200 Chilean fans stormed the Maracana Media Center at the stadium. They broke things, they stole things. Where was the security?
That's the million-dollar question. Frankly, it's shocking where they were. I mean, history of sport, particularly in football, is violence. In 1964, in a match between Argentina and Chile, 300-plus fans were killed. As recently as 2012, in Egypt, riots broke out, 70-plus. So, frankly, I'm shocked that the Brazilians didn't do a better job of protecting the soft targets within these stadiums.
How difficult is it to predict something like that? Is it because it's sports and fans are always very animated, get excited, they drink, they get into fights? When it comes to a major sporting event like World Cup, do you almost have to be ready for stuff like that?
Absolutely. We were down there 2+ years ago working with them on all of their planning around this. And the fact that it is sports, the fact that tensions run high, the fact that you have so many different nations, and then you add in 800,000 fans that come into the country, they have to be prepared for this. This is the exact thing they should have been drilling for, they should have been prepared for. And the fact that their secondary security services were not prepared is rather shocking.
Who is in charge of security in a situation like this? Is it FIFA security or is it Brazilian security or is it a combination of both?
It's a combination, but in the end, it's the host nation that's responsible. When the World Cup was in South Africa, ultimately it was the South African military and the national police that were responsible. Much like in Brazil, it's the federal police that have the responsibility.
So how do you prepare for things like this, for fans acting crazy?
I mean, the number one thing you need to do is prepare for everything. To drill, to have contingency plans, and most importantly, to have your secondary levels of security prepared for that. And that's one of the things we've been watching in Brazil. They have a pretty well-trained federal police force, about 200,000, 250,000. It's these secondary contractors that we really had no idea how well they were trained. And I think tragically we saw in this incident last week, they're just not that well trained, nor do they have the resources they need to back up the federal forces.
There were also a lot of protests by Brazilians before World Cup started. They were saying, all this money went to spending, for World Cup preparations, and meanwhile we have terrible social services. The money should go towards that. We have seen less of protests on the street. Why is that?
I think one of that is probably attributed to the pride of hosting the World Cup. Once it actually started, they have 800,000 fans visiting. They have tens of millions of people watching it every single day around the world. So I think there's a bit of self-pride in your country that helps to protect that. The reality is they're still suffering. The airports were never finished that they needed for this. Many of the stadiums are continuing to tweak throughout the Cup as they see scaffolding come down. So I think in the end, the Brazilian people want to support their country. They want to see their team come home and win it. As an American, I hope the U.S. wins. I hope they beat Portugal tomorrow.
As an Iranian, I hope Iran wins. Unlikely. So what is your assessment of the overall security so far that we've seen in Rio?
I think there was a real good story that wasn't reported that well. A couple days ago, the Brazilians picked up a Mexican drug lord that both the U.S. and Argentina and Mexico had been tracking. And they picked him up trying to get on a plane. And so I think it was a real tribute to what they're doing behind the scenes to really track who's coming and going out of that country. So I think on the national level, they're doing a nice job. I think we'll still need to really watch closely what happens on the stadium level.
Thank you so much. We'll leave it at that. Douglas Smith will speak after World Cup is over.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.